Why does every civilization remember the Great Flood? Imagine discovering a story that exists on nearly every continent on Earth. A man receives a warning. He builds a massive vessel before anyone else believes disaster is coming. He gathers his family. He saves animals. Then, a flood destroys almost everything. When the waters finally disappear, humanity begins again. At first, it sounds like the story of Noah. But here's the mystery. Noah isn't the only man remembered for surviving a great flood. Ancient Mesopotamia remembers Utnapishtim. The Sumerians tell of Ziusudra. India remembers Manu. Greece remembers Deucalion. The Maya, the Aztecs, Native American tribes, Aboriginal Australians, and even cultures in Southeast Asia all preserved their own versions of a catastrophic flood. These civilizations were separated by oceans, mountains, deserts, and thousands of years of history. They spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, and built entirely different societies. So why do they all remember a flood? Is it simply coincidence? Did these stories spread across the ancient world through trade and migration? Or could they preserve fragments of one of humanity's oldest shared memories? For centuries, historians, archaeologists, geologists, and theologians have searched for the answer. Some believe these stories preserve real historical disasters. Others argue they are independent myths inspired by humanity's universal experience with flooding. Tonight, we'll compare the evidence. We'll examine the stories. We'll explore the archaeology. And we'll ask whether the world's oldest civilizations were describing the same event or something else entirely. Chapter 1. Noah. One story, three religions. Ask almost anyone to name a survivor of the Great Flood, and you'll probably hear the same answer. Noah. For billions of people, his story is one of the best-known narratives ever written. Yet many people don't realize that Noah's story exists in three different religious traditions, each preserving the same foundation while emphasizing different details. The earliest written version appears in the book of Genesis, part of the Hebrew Bible. According to Genesis, humanity had become so violent and corrupt that God decided to cleanse the world through a catastrophic flood. Only one man was found righteous, Noah. God instructed Noah to build an enormous ark, giving surprisingly detailed measurements for its construction. The text describes its length, width, height, multiple decks, and even where the door should be placed. Rather than sounding like a legend, parts of Genesis almost read like architectural instructions. Noah was commanded to bring his family aboard, along with animals, to preserve life after the disaster. Most people remember hearing that he took 2 of every kind, but Genesis contains an interesting detail that many never notice. Certain clean animals were brought in groups of 7. Why the difference? Biblical scholars have debated that question for centuries. Some believe Genesis combines multiple older traditions, while others argue the additional animals were intended for sacrifice and food after the flood. When the ark was complete, the rain began. According to Genesis, water also burst upward from beneath the earth, suggesting the flood came from both the sky and the ground. After months adrift, the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. Noah released a raven, then a dove, to search for dry land. When the dove finally returned carrying an olive leaf, it became one of history's most enduring symbols of hope. Christianity preserves the same account, but gives it additional meaning. Early Christian writers viewed Noah's Ark as a symbol of salvation. Just as Noah passed safely through the flood into a renewed world, baptism came to represent a spiritual rebirth. The historical narrative became a theological lesson as well. The Qur'an retells the story from a different perspective. Rather than focusing on the ark itself, it emphasizes Noah's role as a prophet. For years, Nuh called his people to worship one God, but they mocked him, rejected his message, and laughed as he built the ark. Imagine watching someone construct a giant ship nowhere near the sea, while insisting that a devastating flood was coming. To his neighbors, Noah must have seemed completely irrational. One of the Qur'an's most emotional moments has no direct parallel in Genesis. As the flood begins, Noah pleads with one of his sons to board the ark. His son refuses, believing he can survive by climbing a mountain. Moments later, a wave separates them forever. The scene transforms the flood from a story of survival into one of personal tragedy. The Qur'an also identifies the ark's resting place as Mount Judy, rather than the mountains of Ararat. Over the past century, explorers have searched both locations, claiming to discover wooden structures, unusual rock formations, and even shapes resembling the outline of a massive ship. None of these claims, however, has been accepted as conclusive evidence by the wider archaeological community. Despite their differences, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam agree on the central story. Humanity became corrupt. A righteous man received a warning. An ark preserved life. A catastrophic flood changed the world, and civilization began again. For believers, this is sacred history. For historians, it is also something else. A story that can be compared with other ancient civilizations. Because in the 19th century, archaeologists uncovered broken clay tablets buried beneath the sands of Mesopotamia. As scholars slowly translated the strange wedge-shaped writing carved into them, they realized they weren't reading a completely different story. They were reading another flood, another chosen survivor, another great boat, and a tradition that appeared to be older than the earliest surviving biblical manuscripts. If that's true, then who was the world's first flood survivor? Part 2. The stories older than Noah. In 1849, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard excavated the ruins of the ancient Assyrian city of Nineveh, near modern-day Mosul, Iraq. Among collapsed palaces and temples, his team uncovered thousands of clay tablets covered in strange wedge-shaped symbols known as cuneiform. At the time, no one realized these fragments contained some of humanity's oldest surviving literature. More than 20 years later, in 1872, a young Assyriologist named George Smith was translating one of those tablets at the British Museum when he stumbled upon something extraordinary. The text described a man warned of an approaching flood. He built a massive boat, brought living creatures aboard, survived a catastrophic deluge, released birds to search for land, and offered a sacrifice after reaching safety. The similarities to Noah were so striking that, according to contemporary reports, Smith became so excited he reportedly ran through the museum in disbelief. For Victorian Britain, where the Bible shaped much of society, the discovery was astonishing. It suggested that a flood story with familiar elements existed in Mesopotamia long before the earliest surviving biblical manuscripts. But the deeper scholars looked, the more surprising the picture became. Ziusudra, the oldest known flood survivor. The oldest surviving flood narrative comes from the Sumerians, one of the world's earliest civilizations. Its hero was a king named Ziusudra. Unfortunately, the surviving tablets are badly damaged, leaving large portions of the story missing. Even so, the basic outline is clear. The gods decide to send a devastating flood. One god secretly warns Ziusudra, instructing him to build a large vessel. He survives the disaster, emerges after the waters recede, and offers sacrifices. In return, he is granted eternal life. Although incomplete, this is the earliest written flood story currently known to archaeology, dating back more than 4,000 years. Atrahasis, when humanity became too numerous. A few centuries later, another version appeared, the Epic of Atrahasis. This account begins differently. Instead of focusing on human wickedness, it explains that humanity had multiplied so rapidly that their constant noise disturbed the chief god, Enlil. After failed attempts using plague, drought, and famine, Enlil decided to erase humanity with a flood. Not every god agreed. The god Enki, also known as Ea, secretly warned Atrahasis without directly breaking the divine decision. Speaking through a reed wall, he delivered a simple instruction: tear down your house, build a boat, save your life. Atrahasis loaded his family, craftsmen, and animals onto the vessel before the storm arrived. For 7 days and 7 nights, the flood raged across the land. When it ended, Atrahasis offered sacrifices. The ancient text vividly describes the hungry gods gathering around the offering like flies, a detail that reflects the Mesopotamian belief that humans provided food and worship for the gods. Unlike Genesis, where God promises not to destroy humanity again through a flood, the ending of Atrahasis explains how the gods chose to limit future population growth instead of wiping humanity out a second time. The message is different, but the structure is becoming familiar. A warning, a chosen survivor, a boat, animals, a flood, a sacrifice. The flood crosses the world, a memory shared across civilizations. If flood stories had only been found in Mesopotamia, it would be easy to explain. Ideas travel, merchants trade, empires expand, stories spread from one civilization to another. But the deeper researchers looked, the harder that explanation became. Because flood traditions didn't stop at the borders of Mesopotamia. They appeared thousands of kilometers away, among civilizations with completely different languages, religions, and histories. Was this evidence of a single story spreading across the ancient world? Or were different cultures remembering different disasters in remarkably similar ways? India, Manu, and the talking fish. One of the oldest flood traditions outside Mesopotamia comes from ancient India. The story appears in Hindu texts, most famously the Satapatha Brahmana and later the Puranas. Its central figure is Manu, regarded as the ancestor of humanity. According to the legend, Manu discovers a tiny fish asking for protection. The fish promises that one day it will save Manu's life if he first saves its own. As the fish grows larger, Manu realizes it is no ordinary creature. It warns him that a catastrophic flood will soon destroy the world and instructs him to build a great boat. When the flood arrives, the giant fish, often identified as the god Vishnu in his Matsya avatar, pulls Manu's boat safely through the raging waters until it reaches a mountain. After the flood, Manu survives, and humanity begins again. Unlike the Abrahamic tradition, the flood is not always presented as a punishment for human sin. Instead, it is part of a recurring cosmic cycle in which the universe is periodically destroyed and renewed. Different purpose, different religion, yet the familiar pattern remains. A warning, a chosen survivor, a boat, a mountain, a new beginning. China, the flood that wouldn't end. China also preserves ancient flood traditions, but with an important difference. Instead of describing a flood that wipes out all humanity, many Chinese accounts focus on a disaster so enormous that civilization nearly collapses. One of the best-known stories is that of Gun and his son Yu, preserved in texts dating back more than 2,000 years. According to tradition, relentless floods covered the land for years. Gun failed to control them. His son Yu took a different approach. Instead of trying to block the water, he redirected it by digging canals and waterways. His success earned him such respect that he eventually founded the legendary Xia dynasty, traditionally regarded as China's first dynasty. Unlike Noah or Manu, Yu survives not by escaping the flood, but by mastering it. Interestingly, in 2016, geologists reported evidence of a massive outburst flood in the Yellow River Basin dating to around 1920 BCE. Some researchers have suggested it may have inspired later Chinese flood traditions. Others argue the connection remains uncertain. The debate continues. By now, a pattern had emerged. Mesopotamia, India, China, civilizations separated by vast distances, all remembered extraordinary floods. But perhaps the greatest surprise was still waiting. Because across the Pacific Ocean, among peoples who developed independently from the ancient civilizations of the Near East, researchers found flood stories there as well. The Maya remembered one. The Aztecs remembered another. Native American nations preserved dozens of their own. Even Aboriginal Australians passed down stories of rising seas that some researchers believe may preserve memories from the end of the last ice age. The question was no longer whether flood stories existed around the world. The question had become, why did so many civilizations remember them? The search for the truth. One flood, or many? By now, one thing is impossible to ignore: a righteous survivor, a divine warning, a great vessel, animals preserved, a mountain, a new beginning. These elements appear again and again across civilizations separated by thousands of kilometers. But similarities alone do not prove they describe the same event. So what does the evidence actually say? Today, historians generally discuss three major possibilities. Theory 1. A single catastrophic flood. The first theory suggests that many flood traditions may preserve memories of one enormous prehistoric disaster. Supporters point out that at the end of the last ice age, around 20,000 to 7,000 years ago, Earth's climate changed dramatically. Massive glaciers melted, causing global sea levels to rise by more than 120 meters. Entire coastlines disappeared. Land bridges vanished beneath the ocean. Communities living near the sea would have watched their world slowly disappear beneath rising water. For generations, those memories may have been passed down as stories before eventually becoming legends. Some researchers also point to the Black Sea deluge hypothesis proposed in the 1990s. It suggests that rising Mediterranean waters may have rapidly flooded the Black Sea basin thousands of years ago, forcing people to abandon their homes. While the hypothesis remains debated, it demonstrates that large-scale flooding did occur during human prehistory. Theory 2. Many floods, many stories. The second theory is much simpler. Floods happen everywhere. The Nile floods, the Tigris and Euphrates flood, the Yellow River floods, the Indus floods, the Mississippi floods. Civilizations almost always formed near rivers because rivers provided water, fertile soil, and transportation. But those same rivers could also destroy entire cities. According to this view, different societies experienced different disasters and created similar stories because they faced similar challenges. A flood destroys the land. A few survive. Life begins again. The similarities don't necessarily require a shared historical event, only a shared human experience. Theory 3. Stories that traveled. A third possibility combines history with culture. Ancient civilizations traded with one another long before written history became widespread. Ideas traveled alongside merchants. Religious beliefs evolved. Stories were adapted into new languages and new cultures. Many scholars believe the biblical account of Noah and the Mesopotamian flood traditions share a common literary ancestry, though opinions differ on exactly how that relationship developed. Some argue the Hebrew authors adapted older Mesopotamian narratives to express belief in one god rather than many. Others believe both traditions inherited an even older story that no longer survives. The evidence cannot answer every question, but it shows that stories, like people, have always traveled. So, what really happened? The honest answer is, we don't know. No archaeological discovery has proven a single worldwide flood covering the entire planet within human history. Likewise, No discovery has explained why remarkably similar flood traditions appear across so many different cultures. Some stories may preserve memories of real regional disasters. Others may have spread through trade and migration. Some may have changed so dramatically over thousands of years that tracing their true origin is now impossible. And perhaps, more than one explanation is true.